They told me my father died many years ago. Mom insisted he abandoned us. But one day, in old papers, I found a letter that turned my whole life upside down. And now she has nothing left, no money, no reputation, not even family. I always believed my father was worthless. Growing up, my mother drilled it into my head that he was a deadbeat who walked out when I was 3, leaving us penniless and never looking back. Our life wasn't easy, a cramped apartment in a rough part of Boston, endless bills piling up on the kitchen counter, and Mom working herself to exhaustion with 2 jobs. I learned to hate him before I could even remember his face. Every Father's Day at school, every time friends talked about their dads teaching them to ride bikes or taking them fishing, I'd feel that familiar burn of anger and shame. I promised myself that if I ever ran into him, I'd tell him exactly what I thought of men who abandon their children. That burning certainty defined me for 24 years. Until the day I found the letter. Mom was planning to move to Seattle for a fresh start, and she'd asked me to help sort through decades of accumulated stuff in her basement. I was going through dusty boxes of childhood photos and ancient tax returns when I found it, a sealed envelope, yellowed with age, addressed to my old childhood home but never sent. The handwriting was my mother's. My hands trembled slightly as I opened it. The paper inside was crisp, as if it had been waiting all these years for this moment. James, please stop trying to find us. Adam and I are better off without you. Don't come, don't write, just forget we exist. The world tilted sideways. James. My father's name was James. With shaking hands, I appended the entire box. Letters spilled out, dozens of them, some still in their original envelopes, others loose and dog-eared. All from James Collins. My father. The first one was dated just weeks after the day Mom said he'd abandoned us. Sarah, please. I know you're angry, but he's my son too. At least let me know you got the money I sent. Is Adam doing okay in school? Does he still love those dinosaur books I used to read him? I miss him so much it feels like there's a hole in my chest. Another, 6 months later. The checks are being cashed, but I never hear anything back. Please, just send me a photo, or tell me how his first day of kindergarten went. I'm not trying to cause trouble. I just want to be part of his life. Year after year, letter after letter. Him describing sending Christmas and birthday presents that I never received. Begging for updates about my life. Mentioning large sums of money he'd transferred, money that had apparently gone straight into accounts I never knew existed, while Mom made me feel guilty for wanting new shoes or after-school activities. We can't afford it, she'd say, that martyred look on her face. I'm doing the best I can as a single mother. All those years of scraped knees I bandaged myself, parent-teacher conferences where her chair sat empty, lonely dinners of boxed mac and cheese while she worked late, had it all been a lie? The last letter was dated just 2 years ago. Sarah, Adam must be in college by now. I've put aside money for his education all these years. Please, just tell me if he needs it. I've never stopped hoping that someday he'll know the truth. I sat there on the basement floor for hours, reading and rereading, pieces clicking into place like a devastating puzzle. She hadn't just kept him away, she'd systematically erased him, building an elaborate fiction of abandonment while he desperately tried to reach us. To reach me. My phone buzzed, a text from Mom asking how the packing was going. I stared at it, this simple message from someone I suddenly felt I didn't know at all. Who was this woman who could orchestrate such a thorough deception? Who could watch her child struggle and hurt while sitting on a secret fortune? I didn't reply. Instead, I opened my laptop and began to search. James Collins. It didn't take long. He was a successful architect in Chicago, his firm's website full of gleaming buildings and glowing client testimonials. There was his face, older than in my faded memories but with the same kind eyes I somehow still remembered. I called in sick to work the next day. And the next. I didn't tell Mom where I was going. Let her wonder, for once, like she'd made him wonder about me all these years. 48 hours later, I stood on a quiet street in Lincoln Park, staring up at a beautiful brownstone with a brass plaque reading, Collins Residence. My heart pounded as I walked up the steps. What if he didn't want to see me? What if Mom had been right about him all along? But I thought of those letters, of 20 years of desperate reaching, and pressed the doorbell. The man who opened the door was tall, with silver threading his dark hair. He wore reading glasses and a cardigan that somehow made him look both distinguished and approachable. For a moment, we just stared at each other. Adam? His voice cracked on the word. Is it really you? I couldn't speak. My throat had closed up completely. Instead, I held out one of his letters, the paper wrinkled from being clenched in my fist. He took it with trembling hands, eyes scanning the familiar words. Then he looked up, and I saw tears tracking down his cheeks. She never told you. It wasn't a question. All this time. No, I managed. She said you left. That you didn't want us. He made a sound like he'd been punched. Come in, he said softly. Please. I have so much to tell you. The next few hours were a blur of painful revelations. Over coffee that grew cold in our cups, he told me everything. How he and Mom had been happy until the fighting started over his long hours at his fledgling architecture firm. How she'd left suddenly, taking me with her. His frantic searches, the private investigators who kept hitting dead ends as she moved us from city to city. The lawyers who told him she'd filed restraining orders based on false allegations of abuse, making it impossible for him to approach us directly. I tried to fight it in court, he said, running a hand through his hair. But she had documents, forged, I later learned, that painted me as dangerous. By the time I could prove they were fake, she disappeared again. All I could do was send money and hope that someday. The money, I said, my voice hard. She told me we were barely getting by. That she had to work extra shifts just to keep food on the table. His face darkened. I sent thousands every month. Plus extra for birthdays, Christmas, school expenses. I set up a college fund that would have covered any university you chose. When the checks were cashed, I thought. I told myself at least you were being taken care of, even if I couldn't be there. I thought of the tiny apartment, the second-hand clothes, the field trips I couldn't go on because we couldn't afford it. The years Mom spent cultivating an image of the struggling single mother, martyring herself while sitting on a fortune. Hundreds of thousands of dollars, meant for me, that had disappeared into accounts I never knew existed. I need to see proof, I said. Bank records, court documents, everything. He nodded, unsurprised. My lawyer has kept every piece of paper. I'll call her right now. That afternoon, in a sleek downtown law office, I learned the full scope of my mother's deception. The forged court documents. The restraining orders based on fictional incidents. The systematic way she'd hidden money meant for my care, building a nest egg while maintaining our facade of poverty. Most devastating were the records of my father's attempts to reach me, Christmas cards returned unopened, birthday gifts that never made it to me, even attempts to schedule supervised visits that my mother's lawyers blocked with false claims of trauma and fear. I left the law office with a thick folder of documents and a heart full of cold purpose. The scared, angry little boy who'd believed his father didn't want him was gone. In his place was a man who understood exactly what had been stolen from him, and who was responsible. I waited 3 days before returning to help Mom finish packing. I wanted my rage to cool into something more precise. More calculated. When I walked into the house, she was wrapping dishes in newspaper, humming to herself as if she hadn't spent my entire life weaving an elaborate web of lies. "Oh good, you're back," she said cheerfully. "I was getting worried when you didn't answer my texts. Did you manage to sort through those old boxes in the basement?" I sat down at the kitchen table and placed the folder in front of me. "Yes," I said quietly. I found some very interesting things. She turned, a coffee mug wrapped in paper still in her hands. Oh. Letters, I said. Dozens of them. From James Collins. My father. The mug slipped from her fingers and shattered on the linoleum. Her face went chalk white. You're confused, she said quickly. Those must be old dash. Don't. My voice was ice. Don't you dare try to lie to me. Not anymore. I opened the folder and began laying out documents one by one. Bank statements showing regular deposits of thousands of dollars. Court papers with clearly forged signatures. Records of blocked attempts at visitation. You're going to sit down, I said, and you're going to tell me the truth. All of it. And then you're going to face the consequences. Adam, please, she whispered. Everything I did was to protect you dash. Protect me? I laughed, a harsh sound that made her flinch. By stealing my father from me? By watching me hurt and struggle while you hoarded money meant for my care? That's not protection. That's abuse. You don't understand dash. No, I understand perfectly. And so will the police. And the IRS. And every friend and family member you've lied to all these years. I stood up. I've already spoken to Dad's lawyer. They're building a case against you for fraud, embezzlement, and parental alienation. Every penny you stole, every lie you told, it's all documented. She sank into a chair, her face ashen. You can't do this to me. I'm your mother. No, I said quietly. A mother doesn't deliberately hurt her child to satisfy her own spite. A mother doesn't steal decades of love and connection that can never be recovered. You're just the woman who gave birth to me. And now you're the woman who's going to lose everything, your money, your reputation, and your son. I left her there, surrounded by half-packed boxes and shattered illusions. In the coming weeks, as legal proceedings began and the truth spread through our community, I watched her carefully constructed world crumble. Friends stopped returning her calls. Family members who'd sympathized with her tales of single motherhood turned their backs. The money she'd hidden away was frozen pending investigation. I moved to Chicago, into the guest house behind my father's home. Slowly, carefully, we began building the relationship we should have had all along. It's not easy, there are 2 decades of loss and pain to work through. But every shared meal, every conversation, every small discovery of shared traits and interests feels like recovering a piece of myself I didn't know was missing. As for my mother, I heard she had to sell her house to pay for legal fees. The last I knew, she was living in a small apartment, finally experiencing the struggling existence she pretended to have all those years. Sometimes I think about her, sitting alone with nothing but her lies for company. But I don't feel guilty. She made her choices, and now she's living with the consequences. What haunts me most are the what-ifs. What if I'd never found those letters? What if I'd lived my whole life believing that lie? It makes me wonder how many other children are out there, carrying the weight of carefully crafted deceptions, never knowing the truth about who loves them and who betrayed them. The truth is a powerful thing. Sometimes it destroys. Sometimes it heals. Sometimes it does both at once, burning away the rot of lies to make room for something new to grow. I'm still figuring out which kind of truth this is. My father and I meet for dinner every Sunday now. Last week, he brought out a box of old photos, me as a toddler, sitting on his shoulders at the zoo, both of us beaming at the camera. There were dozens of them, carefully preserved despite all the years he thought he'd never see me again. As we went through them together, he told me stories about each one, his voice sometimes catching on details that seemed burned into his memory, the toy dinosaur I refused to sleep without, the way I used to mispronounce spaghetti, the books we read together over and over. I used to take these out sometimes, he admitted, handling the photos gently. On your birthday, or when things got really hard. Just to remember your smile. These moments are bittersweet. Each happy memory he shares is also a reminder of all the memories we never got to make. Every story of toddler me is shadowed by the 20 years of silence that followed. But we're making new memories now, rebuilding something that was stolen from us both. Sometimes I dream about those missing years. I imagine alternating Christmases, summer vacations at his lake house, him teaching me to drive in his old Volvo. In these dreams, I grow up knowing I'm loved by both parents, never questioning my worth or carrying that heavy burden of abandonment. I wake up from these dreams with a peculiar mix of grief and gratitude, grief for what was lost, gratitude for having found the truth while there's still time to build something new. The hardest part isn't the lost time, though. It's dealing with the anger that still surfaces at unexpected moments. When I see fathers and sons together at baseball games. When I find another childhood photo that reminds me of a milestone he should have been there for. When I remember how many nights I cried myself to sleep, believing I wasn't worth sticking around for. My therapist says this anger is normal, healthy even. She helps me direct it where it belongs, not at the father who tried desperately to reach me, but at the mother who orchestrated this elaborate deception. Still, knowing who's really to blame doesn't make the pain any easier to bear. I've had no contact with my mother since that day in her kitchen. She's tried to reach out, tearful voicemails, letters full of excuses and justifications, even attempts to contact me through relatives. I've blocked her number and returned her letters unopened, just as she did to my father all those years ago. There's a certain poetic justice in that, I suppose. Last month, I heard through my aunt that Mom had to declare bankruptcy. The legal fees drained what was left of her hidden accounts, and the IRS is investigating her for tax fraud. She's living in a studio apartment now, working as a cashier at a grocery store. Sometimes I wonder if she thinks about her choices as she rings up other people's groceries, if she misses the comfortable life she built with stolen money and stolen time. Part of me, a small, vindictive part that I'm not entirely proud of, hopes she does. Hopes she lies awake at night like I did, questioning everything she thought she knew about love and family. Hopes she understands now what it feels like to lose something precious and know it's entirely your own fault. But most of me is focused on the future, not the past. Dad and I are planning a road trip this summer, retracing the route he used to daydream about taking with me when I was young. We'll visit the Grand Canyon, camp under the stars, take all the photos we couldn't take before. It won't make up for lost time, but it's a start. This morning, I found a note from him on my desk, just a few lines saying how grateful he is to have me in his life again, signed, Love, Dad. Such a simple thing, but it made me cry. Because that's the real victory here, isn't it? Not the revenge, not watching my mother lose everything, but this, the slow, steady rebuilding of a relationship that should have been mine all along. The truth did destroy something, the elaborate fantasy world my mother built, the lies she used to justify her actions, the false narrative I grew up believing. But it also created space for something real to grow in those ruins. Something honest and healing and true. I am my father's son. No more lies can change that. No more deceptions can break that bond. That's the truth I'm choosing to build my life on now. And maybe that's the best revenge of all.